I, Manbahar, extend a warm welcome to everyone present here on behalf of MindTribe and my colleagues present over here. So, in this workshop, we're going to be talking about the beautiful journey of being a teen's parent. And before we start, here's a quick disclaimer. Can we go to the next slide? So this PPT is the intellectual property of MindTribe. So I would request the audience to not take any screenshots. If there is something that you would like to remember, you may note it down. The purpose of this workshop is to educate and discuss about the different aspects of parenting teens and how to understand, communicate, and help your teen navigate these transformational years. So, a few ground rules to ensure that the flow of this presentation is smooth. Firstly, we're going to be respectful of others. That includes our co-participants and the presenters. Make sure your mics and videos are off. And if there is something that needs to be communicated, you may raise your hand or use the chat box. So, before we begin, here's a quick introduction of our team. As you can see, this is me, Manbahar, junior psychologist, alongside Rudrakshi, who's our specialist psychologist at MindTribe. Along with us, we have Vedika and Yadvi, who are junior psychologists and psychologists respectively. So we're going to be talking about the neuroscience of the teen and how is it that these people differ so much from us in the sense that what causes the first trajectory of being of being different from them, and at what point do they stop being children and they enter this confusing age of adolescence. So just a quick activity to reflect. I would like you to look at these statements one by one, and when you read these statements, you may either use the chat box or raise your hand to unmute the mic. And I would really encourage if we participate together in this. So there are going to be certain statements, and you have to complete the rest of it using one or two lines. So the first one is, in my teens, I was most worried about, and then we have to complete the rest. So you can either use the chat box or you can unmute yourself by raising your hand. Anyone? Anyone who would like to share their answers for this statement? You can feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, so Vinod says worried about facing grown-ups. That's true. A very huge part of being a teenage is facing the anxieties of the confusion that whether we are grown-ups or we're children. And facing grown-ups can be quite a jarring experience. Thank you for sharing that, Vinod. Let's move on to the next statement. The person I looked up to in my teen years was. So let's talk about the person that you might have looked up to in your teen years. It could be a friend, a celebrity, your own parents, any relative, an older sibling. All right. So Rudrakshi says my dad. That is so true. A lot of us relate having our parents as our role models in that age. All right. So the next statement is a lesson I learned the hard way in my teenage years was. Anyone who would like to discuss a very important lesson that kind of changed things for them, and sometimes those mistakes that might have been committed gave a very hardcore response, and now today the way we are, we've sworn that we will not make those mistakes again. Okay, to trust your gut or instinct. I'm sure this must have been a very interesting story to have, that must have taught you to trust your gut or instinct. All right. So the last statement is, in my teen years, I wish my parents could. So, what is it that you, in your adulthood today, wish that when you were a teenager, your parents would have taken this approach instead of that, or they could have, changed something about their tactics when you were a teenager? Payal, I think you've joined a little late. I'll just catch you up on what we're doing. Basically, I'm revealing some statements, and you have to complete the rest by either raising your hand and using the mic, or you can just let it out in the chat box. Okay, so Vinod says they could have had more patience, and that is a beautiful answer, because I have noticed that most of the times the shift and the distance created between teens and their parents oftentimes happens because teens require a lot of patience and a lot of understanding due to their transformational period, and that can create a lot of friction between the parent and the teen if patience is not the core element of interactions. So Payal says, I wish my parents could help me build self-confidence. I'm glad that you brought this up, Payal, because we're going to be talking about how teens and their identity and their self confidence is an ever changing process. So, thank you for sharing that. All right. So, to understand the neuroscience of our teen, we need to understand how does the teenage brain work. Now, there are two parts that build at the same time in the brain. One of them is called the prefrontal cortex, and the other one is called the limbic system. Now, these two parts are very important, and they're just as different, because the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of the brain. It is young and it is figuring things out. It is logical. It wants to know. It is thirsty for knowledge and works on reasoning, forethinking, planning. All the things that we wish our teenager had. So the second part that is also developing is the limbic system. Now, this part works with the emotions, impulses, and it is fully staffed and it's always ready for action, always ready to launch, always full of aggression, energy, libido, you name it. So, the irony is that even though the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain which clearly is the more advanced one here, develops the slowest. It takes at least 25 years for a person to reach full maturity of their prefrontal cortex. So before the age of 25, one cannot expect the prefrontal cortex to be fully mature. Hence, of course, the teens are also not mature. The limbic system, on the other hand, it develops almost instantly by the time one completes their childhood. So, logic, planning, and all of the logical actions are governed by the prefrontal cortex. Emotions, rewarding behaviors, and all the strong feelings, they're all controlled by the limbic system. Moving on, we're going to be talking about the two main parts of the teenage neuroscience. Now that we've discussed how the brain structures are different compared to us, we're going to be talking about what is going on with their hormones. Of course, there's going to be a lot of influx and a lot of changes in how the hormones function. There's going to be puberty, growth spurt, and all of those overdrive of intense hormones, which can change mood, sleep, appetite, their self image, and their behaviors, their peer interactions, all of it. So, the first one is, of course, growth hormone, which creates a growth spurt and it affects mood swings. It can govern impulsivity and one's drive for independence. So, when they start shutting down their doors and they start distancing themselves, all of that can be taken back to how the growth hormones are on the rise. Even their motivation and how they build their sense of self, it is all influenced partially by how growth hormones continue to grow in teens. And then melatonin. So melatonin is a very important hormone, and what it does is it creates us. It makes us sleepy. So if your brain is secreting melatonin, you're going to be feeling asleep, and that really dictates our sleep wake cycles. So if you've noticed, like by a quick show of hands, how many times have we noticed that teens lie under their blanket, like this boy over here, scrolling their phones throughout the night? They sleep late, they wake up late, and it's usually the case quite different from adults who sleep at like 8 9 o'clock and then wake up at 6 7 a.m. But for teens it's usually the opposite. They either sleep at 4 or 5 a.m. and then wake up at 1 or 2 a.m. How many of you have seen this experience with your teens? Okay. So I'm sure Vinod understands how it is like to see somebody follow such a different routine from us. Would you like to share? You can unmute yourself, or you can just use the chat box.
Yes, we see them kind of sleeping or watching the mobile, scribbling them quite often and lying on their bed. So this is like a common pattern.
Right. So how does that like make you feel? What is your analysis of the statement when you see them doing that?
So the feeling is, they are very lazy and they are not putting in any, kind of, they are kind of wasting their time and all. So that is the feeling.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Vinod. Because oftentimes it is true, their sleepiness is confused with laziness. But the thing is that an interesting fact to share that the evolutionary perspective that why teens require more sleep and have more of a night oriented schedule as compared to adults is because when we were living as tribes, when we used to live in forests as early men, the teens were considered to be the ones who had the strongest vitality and were obviously physically stronger. So their body got wired to stay awake and protect the rest of the tribe against predators and other dangers, which is why teens have this um, need and disposition to stay awake at night. But sleepiness is, of course, not being lazy. As mentioned here, tired is not equal to laziness, which means that teens they often appear tired not because they're careless, but because their brains and bodies are undergoing intense growth and rewiring. So, of course, sleep has a very clear connection with mood, as we all have noticed in ourselves that on days when we do not get proper sleep, the next day seems to be quite cranky, slow, and oftentimes annoying with a lower threshold for patience. So, one can be very irritable. And this is oftentimes true in the case of teenagers as well. So, lack of proper sleep worsens irritability, emotional reactivity, and even concentration problems. So, uh, let's go to the next slide. Now that we've understood how the hormones function, how the main hormonal shifts occur in teenagers, let's talk about what kind of a parent do we want to be. And this is completely different from the kind of parent that we are. So if you were to describe what kind of a parent would you want to be, you can use 3 lines to talk about I would change this about my current approach, and the second one would be I aspire to be like this about my current approach, or anything that you have yet to try. So you can either let it out in the chat box or feel free to raise your hand and use the mic. Okay, so Vinod says that I wish I could understand them better. I can see where you're coming from. And honestly, the intent of wanting to understand them already makes this path much easier for you. So I'm glad that you shared this, Vinod. Anyone else who would like to share? Okay, Payal says, in future, I would allow my child to express their emotions. I'm glad that you mentioned this, Payal, because I can see that you are trying to break a cycle over here, because you've mentioned that you want to help them express their emotions better, which clearly means that this is something that hasn't been previously introduced to you. So I'm glad that you're trying to change things for your teenager. Esther says, be more open and communicate well. So we can all see that there is a recurring theme over here that communication seems to be a huge part as to why these miscommunications, these gaps, these distances, and these frictions can occur between you and your growing teenager. So I'm glad that we had this reflective exercise. So now that I mentioned sleep in our previous points, we're going to be talking about how sleep can be such an important factor when it comes to your teen's mental health. So, as I mentioned, there is an important hormone called melatonin, and which is the sleep hormone, and it kicks in quite late at night for them. So, they're naturally inclined to be night owls who prefer staying up late and sleeping till late during the day. But the world doesn't function like that, unfortunately. So, that can create a lot of problems for them. So we cannot let them completely follow the biology here, because that will be a little counterproductive to their other goals. So how do we as parents ensure that they get better sleep and hence their mood and their health in general stays well? So the first one is to set a routine, which could be anything with small little boundaries and rules and restrictions, but to make sure that they are not entirely suffocating and strict, because I'm sure we've all noticed that no 2 days look the same in anyone's life. So maybe an example could probably be that when you wake up, the first thing you're supposed to do is brush your teeth. immediately, like as soon as you get out of the bed. Because when you brush your teeth, you don't feel drowsy and sleepy throughout the day. So the more you delay it, the more likely you're likely to feel drowsy. So one could be a really small step, but it can make a lot of impact. And to not have caffeine as soon as they wake up or right before they're sleeping, because that can really disrupt their sleep cycles. The second one is limiting screen time, and I'm sure this is the one which we may struggle with the most, because technology, screen time, and all, they have become very unavoidable, because even studies usually happen on laptops and tablets these days. So a small short term solution could be probably investing in a pair of glasses which block blue light, installing blue light filters on the screens, and even setting some clear rules as to when is it not okay to use screen. For example, a lot of parents have this rule that one should not use their phone on the dining table while eating. And that is a brilliant rule, because it encourages your teenager to focus in the moment on the meal and encourage conversations and even focus on the people around them. Then, of course, there are some wind down habits. And these habits are essentially habits that promote relaxation, calmness, slowness, because screens in general have a lot of fast paced colors and images, and everything can determine the attention span of the teen. Because all of these fast moving images and the content in short form can also impact their attention span and moods. So it is important that we engage in certain activities which can promote bonding and some sort of a slow paced but very quality oriented time. It could be reading together, maybe not like reading together as in how we read to children. Maybe you could sit with the book along with your teen, and they sit with their book, and you're just sitting there together in silence, calmly reading. And then, of course, the second last point is obviously very important, which is to be realistic, because oftentimes we place our expectations on the teenager, because clearly they're entering into this life of adulthood from childhood, and this transition can create a lot of expectations on them. But at the end of the day, they're still half child, so we need to be realistic, we need to be systematic and consistent with our boundaries and the rules that we're setting on them, because there is a tendency that sometimes they do rebel a little bit. So unrealistic and extra strict rules can sometimes be counterproductive and create a lot of gaps. And then, of course, the last one is to model healthy sleep. Remember that at the end of the day, they still look up to you, and they still model whatever we do as parents. So, when we say model healthy sleep, it clearly means that when you follow a schedule of consistency and routine, it can be a great signal to them to practice similar behaviors. So, a very important part of teens is their ever changing bodies. And this can be quite a jarring experience for somebody who is entering a whole new world. So, from their perspective, I'm sure you guys must also be remembering this, how you must have noticed changes in your body, your voice, how people started perceiving you, how you started perceiving yourself, and how we begin comparisons and how physical changes can happen. Um, I think while your camera is on, okay. Uh, so physical changes can feel really, really unsettling, because rapid height gain and weight gain and appearance shifts. Like sometimes teenagers get a lot of acne, and they may get a lot of disproportionality in their body. These kind of shifts can leave teens feeling awkward, embarrassed, and even unsure of themselves. So this can lead to a lot of comparisons amongst themselves, like with each other, with celebrities, and this is the part where they develop unrealistic standards, and they may also indulge in behaviors that they might do to so-called fix these kind of flaws that they perceive in themselves. So comparisons can often feel like a trap, which is why I've mentioned comparison traps, because they are oftentimes cyclic and they're self-feeding. So constant exposure to peers and media ideals, they often fuel insecurity, self-doubt, and body dissatisfaction. And you might be thinking that this is only true for girls, but studies have shown that this affects all teenagers regardless of their gender. It only manifests in different forms. So, this can really lead to a lot of dissatisfaction with oneself and how they perceive their body versus the body of who they admire. So, it is not just their changing bodies, but also their identity. Yeah. So their identity goes through a massive shift, because this is also the part where they are trying to seek who they are and how do they place themselves in this world. This is a time where they're trying to develop their own narrative of how they see themselves and how they want to be seen by others. So it is really important to understand that their self esteem and self confidence and self identity are all going under a massive reconstruction. So appearance becomes heavily tied to their self worth, making teens extra sensitive to how they look and how others see them. Which is why it is very important to practice positive modeling, because you are the only constant element in their life. Everything else is changing around them. Their tastes are changing, their friends are changing, their own bodies are changing. Nothing is consistent to hold on to. So that can be so anxiety inducing. You are, as a parent, are the only constant in their life who can ground them and anchor them with your positive modeling. So, your attitude toward your own body can strongly influence how your teen can learn to see and accept themselves. So, it has been noticed a lot of times that parents who oftentimes express their dissatisfaction with their own bodies in front of their teens, it can be very jarring for them to develop their own self worth with their body for the same. Now that we've discussed a lot of times as we've interacted, that communication seems to be a very important and a core element of how teen and parent interaction works. Let's talk about some words that build versus words that break. So that we're going to be talking about some do's and don'ts statements, and they can dictate how we can fix certain statements that we exhibit during our interactions and how they can be improved on. So do offer gentle support, help them practice sleep hygiene instead of forcing them to sleep by snatching their devices. So, while both of these actions have the same goal, we want to ensure that they follow sleep hygiene and they practice a proper routine. One is offering support, and it is helping them practice by using modeling, by setting realistic and and small rules. But the other one is using force and is offering little to no explanation and is seen as an aggressive behavior. So that can oftentimes trigger a lot of rebellion and a lot of defiance from the teenager. So another example is, do validate their feelings, educate on neutral body image concepts. A healthy habit can be to practice complimenting people by saying that by using compliments that are not oriented around their body. So maybe, because we've oftentimes noticed that whenever we want to compliment somebody, the first compliment that we can think of is, you're very good looking, you're very pretty, you're very beautiful, or oh wow, you've got a great body, or your skin is so clear. Let's try to inculcate compliments and adjectives for people which are more focused on how they are as a person. So, introducing compliments like, I love spending time with you, or you're such a kind and a generous person, these qualities can stay innate and can also teach your teenager that body is a temporary it's a forever changing temporary state of being, and it can always be changed, it can always be modified in any way whatsoever. So to compliment people on their body can be giving this subconscious signal that at the end of the day you are what your body is. And this is important because, as I mentioned, they do tie their self worth to their body. So, a counterproductive way would be to dismiss them or say that, you're overreacting. There's nothing wrong with you. I don't know why do you keep on obsessing over your body all the time. It's not that big of a deal, but to them it really is. So it is very important that we stoop down to their lens and see that what is it that is viewed from their perspective about how their self-worth is tied to their body. So now Rudrakshi will be taking over some more words that build versus some words that break.
Thank you, Manbahar. Good morning, everybody. Let's continue the flow. So, starting off with what you must do respect their temperament and preferably suggest smaller gatherings, if not bigger ones, right? And avoid forcing them to come out of their shell or shame them. Sometimes shaming can also sound like, why are you so antisocial? As Manbahar discussed, they're still figuring themselves out, their identity, and so much more. Their temperament, their mood is very, very subjective, right? We want to make sure that we encourage them, but not push them to just show up for a social event. And there's a very beautiful example which is given by one of the most prominent, I think, researchers and psychologists in this field of educating parents on parenting, where she talks about having these small moments of connection in between a social event or a party or something with your teen or with your child, so that they know that you are there with them, you are supporting them. And again, foundation of it is just to explore or to be curious as to why they are reluctant to not be attending the same. Next, we have another two, which is to give them space but affirm support and care, which may also sound like, I'm here when you're ready, right? And avoiding creating a passive or active pressure using a phrase like, tell me now or I'll take your phone away, right? Giving them that space whilst also making boundaries. We'll get to how to reinforce boundaries and make firmer boundaries as we move forward over part 2. But just a small example wherein words of affirmation have more effect on them over these statements or sentences, such as tell me now or else this will be the repercussion, in a very policeman tone of sorts, right? Continuing the flow, let's look at the many faces of parenting and let's try to see or find which one is yours. Okay. Now we can turn a little bit inward. I'll be going through some of the parenting styles here very quickly, just a few statements, and you can see which one you resonate the most with. First is, if you set clear rules and expectations while also being warm and supportive. If anybody here relates to that, then you fall into the authoritative parenting category, where you believe in providing a firm structure, but you also want to listen to your teen's perspective. Next style is, do you often enforce strict rules and expect obedience with little room for discussion? This reflects more of an authoritarian approach. And with this style, control is high and flexibility is low. We set the rules and our child is expected to follow them without any question. This can lead to compliance out of fear, but may also foster the critical thinking or communication skills your teen will need as an adult. So this is kind of like, the Hitler oriented approach or the my way or highway approach, which will just restrict their critical thinking abilities, decision making abilities, or even communication skills at large. Next is, how many of you guys find yourself avoiding saying no and allowing your teen to make most of their choices freely with very minimal boundaries? If you fit into this category, then this reflects a permissive parenting approach. While this style is high in warmth and support, it is also low on control. And a lack of structure can make it difficult for your teen to learn self discipline and responsibility. This approach can be seen as being a friend instead of a parent. And it is sometimes also called the quote unquote anything goes approach, right? Going with the flow. Last, a common style or phase of parenting is, how many of you guys sometimes feel less involved or distant due to stress or a busy work life or other priorities? This often reflects what we call the uninvolved or neglectful parenting approach. And this style tends to be low on both warmth and control. And we want to make it clear that it's not born out of lack of love, but often out of overwhelm or belief that the teen should either be completely independent or you have your own personal challenges, right? This lack of emotional and practical support can sometimes leave the teen feeling very alone and without guidance. And this is also sometimes called the you're on your approach, on your own kind of an approach, right? Now, as you consider all of these approaches, please do remember that no one parent has to necessarily, at all stages of parenting their child or even the teenage years, fit into just one box of parenting, right? And our goal isn't to approach all of this with perfection, but with awareness. When you understand your instinctual or your default style, you are more likely to make more conscious choices to provide what we call the balance of a nice structure and support to your teens, which will help them thrive, right? And now that we've explored different parenting styles, we do have a clear winner here that provides the most balanced and beneficial environment for your teen's development. It's authoritative parenting, right? The first one. This approach is the perfect blend of expectations and high support. It's about being a guide on the side, not a dictator, right? Here you set clear rules and expectations. Your teams knows the boundaries and what's expected of them. However, you also believe in providing immense warmth, support, and open communication. So this isn't exactly about, because I said so, so you wouldn't do it. It's actually explaining the why behind certain rules or boundaries that you're reinforcing for your team. This approach also helps you maintain your role as a parent while respecting their growing need for very important independence, right? This particular style of parenting also has been found by research to have long-term benefits. First is it actually facilitates better confidence and independence. When you give your teen the choices within a safe framework, they learn to trust their own judgment, which builds genuine confidence and also a healthy sense of independence. So they're not just following your orders, they're actually learning to make more responsible decision or to take responsibility of their own decisions. There's also emotional regulation, very, very important. So open communication being a very important part of authoritative parenting facilitates making the teens feel safe when they're talking about their emotions. When you calmly discuss conflicts and feelings, you're teaching them how to regulate their own emotions and navigate difficult situations, which is a key skill that I'm sure we'll all agree for our adulthood years, right? Lastly, there's responsible decision making. So, here we encourage our child to practice critical thinking. So instead of just going about reinforcing a rule for our child, we may ask, what do you think might happen if you do this particular activity? This prompts them to also perhaps weigh their consequences and learn to make good choices on their own, rather than simply reacting to your commands or putting upon your beliefs or your fears onto the child, right? In the end, authoritative parenting definitely helps you create a relationship based on mutual respect and trust, and it allows you and your teen on a journey to help your teen be more confident, capable, and emotionally intelligent adult, right? Which is the need of the hour at this day and age. Time for a quick interaction. Let's reflect. How do I respond when my teen pulls away? What is a common behavioral pattern that you catch yourself responding to? Feel free to write your responses in the in call messages section, or you can raise your hand as well. This is a deep and reflective question. Do take your time. I'd give you guys perhaps a minute to think about this. Okay, Manbahar shares giving them silent treatment. That's a very common pattern as well. Also comes from sometimes certain learned beliefs from our own childhood, or just avoiding having a one on one confrontation with your kid. Give them a lecture on good behavior. Right, Mr. Thomas, I think this is a very common pattern that we do find amongst parents. And there's a beautiful I think YouTube video wherein Dr. Wilgus, another renowned psychologist who works with parents and teens, talks about the effect on lecture and its relatively lower impact on their teens. Reminds me of that. Thank you for sharing your reflections with us. Anybody else? All right, no worries. Let's continue. Okay, very important part, which is so far. Okay, so we've discussed how to support your teen. Now, another very important point is how do you turn this support inward as well, as to taking care of your own self, because obviously nobody can pour from an empty cup, right? We definitely understand how demanding parenting can be, especially parenting a teen. The emotional availability, the patience, the energy it requires is immense. And despite that, perhaps the response or the reaction that they may come up with would not always be very, very fruitful and confirming, right? So, just to reinforce and just to let you guys know that we see, and that just as their brains are undergoing a massive remodel, so too are your emotional reserves being tested daily. And we do understand that your teen needs to be present and calm, but that's impossible if you're running on empty yourself, right? Another very important point is to know that self care is not selfish. Very common pattern amongst mothers in a lot of cases also fathers, where there's a common misconception that if you are taking care of yourself or prioritizing yourself, sometimes it can be looked at being selfish. It's funnily the opposite, right? Caring for yourself tends to be a prerequisite for caring for your loved ones, let alone your team. Let's think of the oxygen masks on an airplane. You have to put your own on first before you can help anybody else, right? So your well-being directly impacts your ability to respond to your team with empathy and patience rather than frustration, right? Recognizing one of the most important warning signs or burnout signs is also very, very important. It's crucial because if you're constantly feeling irritable, fatigued, overwhelmingly frustrated, those are some of the clear signs that it's time for you to reflect, sit down with yourself, and perhaps recharge. If you keep ignoring these warnings, it can lead to less effective parenting and a strained relationship with your team. Talking about some of the simple practices or ways you can actually refill your cup. It doesn't have to be a very big thing. It could start with the smallest things, starting off with prioritizing your sleep as well. My co host very beautifully spoke about the importance of sleep for teens, even for adults, for parents of teens. It's very, very important that you guys prioritize your 7 to 8 hours of sleep, perhaps sound sleep, and also focus on your own nutrition, well-being, and exercise. There's also this part of perhaps taking few quick or quiet moments to breathe, reflect, and simply be still. It could be while you're having that morning cup of tea or evening coffee, whatever it is for you. Sometimes it could also be going out for a nice hobby. For some people, gardening is an amazing hobby. Whatever it is that truly fuels you, because taking care of yourself is not a luxury, it's an essential part of being the parent to your teens needs as well, right? Doesn't have to be something that you do daily. Even a weekly ritual for yourself can be re-energizing. Okay, as we are wrapping up part one of our day one of parenting teens workshop, we have a small activity that you guys can take away from this part: writing a letter to your team. So, here we have shared some journaling prompts for you to either kickstart your letter or pick up when you feel a sense of loss of words, because we completely understand that as you sit and write a letter to your team, it can bring in a combination of feelings, which could be a mix of thoughts, emotions, or other things, and combination of a lot of other things that may be going on in your mind in context with what is your relationship with your teen right now, right? So feel free to take this as an inspiration. I'm keeping this slide for maybe 30 seconds, and then we'll wrap part one. All right, so to conclude part one, we have a quote here: a garden grows best where the gardener tends to both the soil and their own hands. A gentle reminder to prioritize yourself, your care, before you tend to your teens' needs, right? And yeah, don't forget to be kind to yourself as well. It is a very tumultuous period for you as a parent as well. Nobody can be perfect. There will always, obviously, be bouts of frustration and anger and disagreements. It's how you approach it after that situation is what really matters, and that's what we'll be talking about in part two. Before that, we have a quick ad break from MindTribe. So, talking quickly about one on one counseling, which is personalized, confidential session between a client and a trained therapist. It will help you gain some incredible insights into your own thoughts, behaviors, patterns, and emotions, and managing those emotions. A lot of the times, also addressing specific issues such as anxiety, stress, or other relationship problems. And of course, looking at it from a goal setting perspective. It could be personal, it could be professional, it could be short term, it could be long term. Right? We would also like to introduce an ebook that we've worked on, um, called as the Parenting Teens Evolving Parents ebook. This includes a lot of content that we've spoken about here and so much more. It includes more activities, more reflective questions, interactions, conversations that you can have with your teen to connect deeper with them. We've also given research based ideas or recommendations which have come up by some of the most prominent experts in this area. Few samples of the same. This is an exercise, pause and reflect, which could be printed and put on your fridge or anywhere else where you would like to just have this small activity or reflection with yourself every time you're having a difficult conversation with your teen. We have sections like truth bombs or reflections and also affirmations for yourself as you're approaching concepts like repair. We have some interesting activities on boundary making with your teen and how you can sit and incorporate this with your teen. Also, some practical approaches of suggestive situations. What are statements that you can say, you do end up saying, or versus what are situations which will have a deeper impact on your teen. Lastly, we also have given a shout out to some of the experts that we've referred to as we go about this entire building of this workshop and this ebook as well. So that also with hyperlinks, so that you guys can reach out and follow their content or learn more as you would like. And we're offering a one on one free session for you guys, both the ebook and the one-on-one free session at an affordable cost of rupees 249. The details of the same we would be sharing in the WhatsApp group once we're done with this workshop. Resuming the promotion of counseling with us, we have some of the most highly talented counselors here. Our charges are pretty affordable, starting from 800 going up to 5,000 depending on the seniority. And our first session, which is technically at 449, if you go ahead with the ebook, would be free of cost for you. And we also have some affordable packages. If you would like, you like the flow with the counselor, then you can definitely book in more sessions. Lastly, if you have any urgent questions, you can ask right now related to counseling, or else I'll continue. All right, great. I'll just continue. Right. As we move forward to part two, we've understood teens to a certain degree, the neuropsych way, the realistic way. Let's learn how to reach them, because behind every eye roll is definitely a story waiting to be heard. We're going to take a quick 2 to 4 minutes break, and then we'll be back with part two. If you have any questions, any doubts in the meantime, feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'll be attending to them after about 2 to 4 minutes. All right, let's resume. Let's get to the heart of the matter, where we'll talk about fostering deeper connection and trust with your team. So, as we by now, of course, understand and some of us have experienced, teen years can feel like a tug of war. Your child pulling for independence on one end while you're holding on for connection. The truth is, both are needed. In this session, we'll uncover how to bridge that gap with curiosity, empathy, and trust. You'll learn how to turn everyday conversations into deeper connections, set boundaries without breaking bonds, and respond in ways that make your team feel both respected and supported. By the end, you will walk away with practical tools to build a relationship that isn't just about surviving the teenage years, but thriving through them together. All right, let's get started with an interactive segment. I'll be presenting a few instances or statements. Give a thumbs up reaction if you have said the same or similar thing to your team. You can use the emoji reaction section here, as you can see, to give a thumbs up or thumbs down reaction if you have used these sentences or if you haven't, respectfully, right? Okay, let's get started. The first statement is, Beta, I can see you're feeling really stressed about exams. It's completely understandable to feel that way with so much pressure. How many of us have said that to our teens? Okay. Okay, Mr. Thomas has. Great. Next is, why do you always have to be so dramatic? It's such a small thing. Okay, great. I can see you're working so hard on this project. I'm proud of your effort, regardless of the outcome. That's great. You never tell us anything. Do you think we're strangers? Another pretty relatable statement, I believe. Even though we might have different opinions, I really value your perspective and want to understand it better. Okay. You're always on your phone. It's like you don't even care about us. It must be frustrating when things don't go as planned. I understand how disappointing that can feel. All right. Why are you so sad all the time? You spoil everybody's mood. Another very common statement. Okay, I'm glad that nobody in the participants have said this to your team. I've noticed you seem a bit quiet today. Is there anything on your mind you'd like to talk about? That's a great question to ask your team. Is there anything in particular that you guys observed in these sentences? I already have the response on the screen. The red ones were obviously invalidating and it disturbs bonding at large, right? These can also be dismissive, and even you wouldn't have found these words very, very encouraging when you were a teen, right? And the ones with blue font color were the ones which are deeply validating, acknowledging of the teen's struggles and facilitating a deeper and trusting bond. Right? Great. We've started on a great note. Let's get a few things clear now. A few facts checked. So, an esteemed psychologist, Dr. Wilkes, whom I have already quoted previously, with about 20 years of experience on parenting and helping parents with parenting teens, a specialization in teens, has written a book on parenting teens titled Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. Quite an interesting title, where he talks about how childhood comes to its natural end by the age of 30. Interesting, right? Therefore, it is your child's, who's now a teen's, role to separate and make their own identity. So, your job isn't over, it basically changes. The teens are now very young and very poor adults. They own nothing and they're completely inexperienced. So, your job goes from teaching to training. And one of the most common parenting mistakes he quotes is using childhood parenting techniques with adolescents. A quick question: when will you say your child or your teen is at the level of being an adult? Feel free to think on this, and then I'll come back to Dr. Wilkes's approach. If you would like to share the same on chat box, feel free to do that as well. All right. I am guessing. Right. Okay. So, as far as Dr. Wilkes's research is concerned, when he was working on that book, he said that there are three most common responses to this question. Some say a particular age. It could be 18, it could be 21, it could be 30. Or another very common response is till the time they're living under my roof, or as long as I'm paying for them living under my roof, I'll be the one who would be their parent. They haven't been an adult yet, or they can't be an adult yet till the time they're living under the same roof. Or another very common one is I'll know when I see it, which can be like when I can see that he has taken up certain responsibilities or she has learned a few skills or gotten this particular job, something on these lines, right? The thing is that everybody will have a different answer. But what we must definitely understand is that our teenager is an adult in training, right? Which now takes us to another very interesting concept by Dr. Wilkes, which is planned emancipation. This is a parenting strategy to help parents gradually release control and prepare their teenagers for adulthood. He talks about creating what he calls a freedom list, such as clothing, finances, some elements in the freedom list. Now, to help you better understand this, let's look at it this way. Your child is a small country that you, the bigger developed country, had taken over and were governing for about 10 to 12 years now. I've obviously taken the map of our country for better representation. Now, you, the developed country, is starting to decide that you will start to withdraw control or governance from some of these states. And the longer vision that you have for this is that you're going to let this small country have their own identity. So these states, or rather freedom elements, can look like extracurricular activities, managing money, their grades and homework, clothing, friends, screen time, sleep schedule, and more, right? But what we must also know is that freedom comes with responsibility. So there obviously have to be boundaries with these freedoms. So either you be the judge and announce the boundaries, and when there is a breach of these mutually agreed boundaries, there are going to be consequences. Or you be the policeman and go after them to make them follow the boundaries, right? Dr. Wilgus obviously suggests that being the judge is the best plan here. Now, to understand this list of freedom and boundaries better, let's have a look at what he's presented in the book. So, as you can see on the screen, on the left side, there are a few examples of some freedoms. On the right, there are a few examples of boundaries. Let's have a look at one or two of them. Let's start off with the very basic. Use your own judgment in keeping your room as clean or dirty as you see fit, right? Now, the boundaries here are they are supposed to be doing their own laundry. It could be putting their own clothes to wash and then drying them out. It could be making sure that another thing is to make sure that there is no food in their room, right? And no odors beyond their room. Now, again, these are some boundaries that you reinforces. Beyond these 3 pointers, whatever they see fit is something that they can incorporate, right? Likewise, another very common thing, using your own judgment in deciding when to go to bed. You can be in your room and be quiet by this time, right? Again, when you fall asleep is not in the parents' control, right? All screens are ideally to be off by this particular time. Again, that's a boundary that is to be reinforced, right? We'll get to how to reinforce these boundaries better and how to navigate when they aren't followed as well in the later part. Next is wake yourself up and be ready on time. Another very interesting boundary or activity suggestion that Manbhar came up with would be just making sure that you brush your teeth the first thing in the morning, right? Another interesting boundary, parents will not help with fatigue related problems here, right? So he's come up with this very interesting list of freedoms and boundaries, and this is a great inspiration table that you guys can take and work on with your teen on this, right? Where they are given independence with certain understandable and mutually agreed upon restrictions. Now, of course, not every restriction would be something that they would also agree upon. That is where the balance comes in, and we'll also discuss on how to approach that with more empathy and reinforce your intentions with them. Now, let's have a quick view on a teen's narrative on parenting. There's this really interesting 5-minute YouTube video that we found, which talks about a teen's experience as to how she's being parented. Let's have a look at that.
One morning, shortly after my 13th birthday, I walked out into the living room and saw my mom reading one.
Let me just make sure that the captions are on.
One morning, shortly after my 13th birthday, I walked out into the living room and saw my mom reading 1, 2, 3 Magic Teen. Communicate, Connect, and Guide Your Teen to Adulthood by Dr. Thomas W. Fallon. My first thought was that she doesn't need to be reading this. She knows how to parent me. I'm not going to change. Yeah, I was wrong. The next week I was thinking to myself, what if I wrote a book about parenting? Wouldn't that be interesting? I bet every parent would like to know what their teen's thinking about their parenting. So when this opportunity popped up, I thought this would be a perfect topic to talk about. We'll start with technology, because technology is an area where teens and parents usually don't get along. Mostly because of the difference between technology from today and when my parents were teens. In my opinion, I think a child should get a phone based off of the environment. So what I mean by that, if your child lives in Iowa, kids usually don't need a phone at a younger age. But for kids who live in New York City, they have to walk to school and get food in the city. So it's more important to have a phone at a younger age for safety purposes. There's age, but there's also time to consider. For me, I think the time limit should be anything that the parents can handle. What I mean by that, if you are spending 12 hours on your phone and tell your kid you only have 1 hour screen time, there's a problem. Don't set time limits for your kid if you can't follow them too. I mean, come on, parents, have a little fairness. A time limit should be anything that you can handle. In order to understand your teen, you need to understand what your teen thinks of you. Some teens describe their parents as certain stereotypes. These stereotypes fall into two categories: the boss and the loosey-goosey. The boss is a strict parent that you might hear saying, "What I say goes," and "When you make the money, then you can make the rules." The loosey-goosey lets anything slide. For example, a teen could stay up all night, but the loosey-goosey wouldn't have a problem with that. Also, a loosey-goosey could also be okay with one thing and be strict on another. For example, a teen could have a very strict bedtime, but have as much screen time as they like. The parent that I like to see is not the boss, nor the loosey-goosey, but in the middle. I call this parent the listener. The listener gives directions, but let their teen have options. The boss and the loosey-goosey aren't bad parents, but the listener takes the good out of these two and then leaves the bad. Imagine your teen wants to quit the basketball team and get a job at McDonald's. The listener would ask questions before the teen would make a decision. The listener would also give directions on places to work if they didn't want them to work that place. But how can you listen to your teen if he or she is so mad? Or how can your teen listen to you if you're so mad? Let's talk about emotions. So, emotions. We all have them. But teen emotions are very special. According to Marwa Azab in her PhD article, Why Are Teens So Emotional?, the part of the brain that controls the emotional system is called the limbic brain structure. The limbic system is slower to develop than our logical system. It takes some time for a teen to connect her emotional system and her logical system. Basically, when I'm feeling sad or mad, the emotions feel very intense. When I'm feeling sad or mad, it feels like a wave has just crashed into me. I'm not thinking why I'm sad or mad. It's just there. One day after tennis practice, I was thinking to myself, I don't really want to join the team. It was a lot of work and it was every day, so I asked my mom about it in the car. She said that we're committed to the team. And all of a sudden, I started crying. I couldn't stop. That wave of emotions just hit me and I cried all the way home. And my mom was so calm about it. That made me even more mad. I was expecting my mom to get really mad at me, but when she didn't, that got me really mad. When I got home and calmed down, I was thinking about what just happened. I just had my first mood swing, and I didn't even know it. So what I learned about parenting from my first mood swing is that when your teen's experiencing a wave of emotions, the key for parenting is to stay calm. If you stay calm, your teen's wave emotions will pass, and they'll realize that they're being silly. But if you fight back, your teen actually has a reason to be mad. They won't think about how they just had a mood swing, they'll think about how you just yelled at them. So parents, if your teen's experiencing a mood swing, stay calm and realize it's not you, it's emotions. As a beginner teen, I'm starting to learn about emotions, understanding technology, and seeing different types of parents. I also understand since I'm the oldest, my parents are figuring this out too. And by the way, I love my parents, and this is not about how bad they are at parenting. This comes from a variety of places and my realization on, wow, it's really hard to parent a teen. We all experience like what it's to be a teen, but with a little bit of listening, we'll all get to the finish line. Thank you.
Great. That was an amazing insight from a teen. Let's get to talking about sturdiness, a few points that she also spoke about. So, sturdiness is quite extensively spoken about in another prolific psychologist called Dr. Becky Kennedy, where she talks about how sturdiness is about standing on your ground with these boundaries. It isn't about perfection, it's about acknowledging whatever argument, yelling, or fight you had between with your teen, which may sound like, I know we're at this difficult stage, let's take a break and get back to this topic in an hour, right? So you're reinforcing that boundary while also taking your stand with your own emotions. Which brings us to the next question. What are the two main jobs a parent has? Again, something that's been posed often by Dr. Kennedy. According to her, these are the two main jobs: boundaries or setting boundaries, whilst also validating and empathizing with them. Now, for most people, these two different jobs can't be done by the same parent, or it's just not possible. You either choose one of them, right? Which isn't true. And that is what a lot of her works talk about. Let's look at them one by one. Let's talk about boundaries. Now, boundaries are not requests, they are things we tell people we will do, and they require the other person to do nothing about it. For example, if you don't clean your room and then struggle to find that notebook early in the morning before your bus arises, I am not going to intervene and help you with that. It is a result of your actions or inactions, and no matter how urgent it is, I will not be able to assist you with that, right? This whole scenario is very well discussed in another really interesting YouTube video by Dr. Wilgis, where he talks about how him and his wife would just continue having their tea and in a way empathize with their child that, well, it's interesting that you haven't cleaned your room in a week, so it is difficult for you to find that particular notebook. And as we had discussed those rules and boundaries before, we won't be able to help you. You would either have to go without it or you will have to find a way out of it, right? Another very important thing as you're reinforcing these boundaries is to understand that this change doesn't have to be all of a sudden, but something that's more gradual, and very importantly, something that you must have a talk to your teen about before you execute these boundaries. It's not that one day you're assisting them with all of these last minute situations and tomorrow onwards you just choose to not do the same. They would be feeling very, very helpless and also just scared at the end of it, right? Why is the parent behaving in such a different way? When you talk to them, when you reinforce these boundaries, that okay, this is how it's going to be. These are your areas of freedom, and this is these are some of the rules amidst that freedom and that independence. And if you don't follow these, then there will be consequences, right? Now, these boundaries can, as Dr. Kennedy says, sound like I know we're in this complex disagreement, and I want you to know that I love you. And my number one job is to keep you safe, and I'll do everything to maintain that. Very, very relevant in context to when the teen is stepping out of the house, when you're reinforcing a boundary around their safety and they're throwing a fit, right? The reminder, of course, as Dr. Kennedy says, they will not have the most heartwarming response that you would like for them to be. They may not understand it at that point in time, but they always hear, they will always listen, right? And as the teen in the YouTube video that we just shared also shared about how she realized because of her mother's calm nature that maybe she was overreacting. So, whatever you say or whatever you act does have an impact. It doesn't have to reflect at that point in time, it may reflect maybe in a few hours for some situations, maybe in a few days or in a few months, but it will have an impact. That is something that the researchers and these experts can definitely assure you. Next is, how do we reinforce validation and empathy? So, Dr. Kennedy speaks about how rules without connection, will always lead to rebellion. It could be a silent rebellion hidden from you, it could be a pretty overt rebellion, the arguments, the disagreements, right? It is important that we validate their feelings, even if we don't agree with them. We have to make them feel seen. It may sound something like, it's interesting how you're so stressed about this particular math exam. Despite being one of the high scorers in your class, I wonder what really goes in your mind every time you have this math exam. I'd love to help you ease this stress in whatever way you would like. Would you want to talk about this? Just something that you approach with curiosity, not necessarily a mock or a taunt, or just because something doesn't make sense to you, doesn't go very well with your nature, doesn't mean that that's something that is beyond your ability to understand as well, right? Their feelings that they feel very, very mad at this particular friend of theirs who's chosen to just not show up last minute for this particular movie night that they discussed that they will have. It may sound very, very minuscule to you, but if you were to look at it from their lens, it may be something very, very big. They may be looking forward to that interaction. They may have a few things that they would want to discuss with that friend, or they may just want to have that shared laughter with that friend, right? The moment you step into that, again, you may try your best to fill in the gap of that friend. Sometimes it may work, sometimes it wouldn't. What is important is to understand where they are really coming from. And another very important disclaimer, we may not always understand or we may not always agree, because they themselves are struggling to understand. As we also saw in the YouTube video, she wasn't really aware where these wave of emotions and tears really came from, right? So being patient as we're navigating this is essentially the key. Another very important point that I feel like we often forget is that a kid's job is to actually feel their feelings. Don't make them run away from those feelings. A quick example. Imagine your teen coming over from this particular football selection meeting, and he tells you that he was the one who didn't get selected. He's been trying for 3 years now, but he still couldn't crack that. The first instinct of most protective parents is to help the child recall that, okay, well, it's okay if you're not great at football or soccer, maybe you're great at this particular subject or this particular sport or this particular activity or skill or whatever it is, right? It is a protective instinct because you also feel bad looking at your kid like that. What these psychologists highlight is that this, a lot of the times, especially if this is a common pattern, ends up giving an unconscious signal to your teen that just avoid your feelings, just don't sit with them, you don't have to acknowledge them. which in long term can be very, very problematic, right? We may have, or the team may have, struggle accepting failure, disappointment, such different relatively challenging emotions, even anger for that matter, right? How these psychologists suggest us to go about such a situation is to perhaps sit with them and be like, I understand how frustrating that would be. You've been trying for 3 years now. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to try another year? What do you think about it? Of course, not always will they be like, yes, I want to do something about it, or I will give it another shot, or I'm not going to approach this, or whatever it is. The idea is to be willing to sit with them in that mud of emotions. Because when you are sitting with them, you would know exactly when to help them get out of it as well. Right? So just sitting with them, letting them feel their feelings, because the only way to get through those feelings is to feel them, and that's how you learn to develop healthier ideas and coping strategies, or just uh, instincts when it comes to these difficult emotions or feelings or thoughts, especially when it's anger or frustration, right? Happiness is something that can still be shared or lived through. So yeah, this is another very, very important point when you're approaching validation and empathy. Very, very important. Try to empathize with your team when they're going through something very difficult, rather than directing them to something that's completely different, right? And of course, you'd be able to support them and to empathize with them and to sit with their feelings when you are also willing to sit with yours. And that is where the role of one-on-one therapy also comes in, right? If you aren't seeking that already, please take this as an encouragement to do so. And if you already feel you have an amazing emotional capacity and strength to process your own feelings, kudos to you and all the best with your team. Okay, another quick question. What do you want your kid or your team to be? Do you want them to be a nomad, or do you want them to be an explorer? I'll give you guys a quick definition of these two as well. So, nomads, as we all know, are individuals who don't have a set foundation or place where they can call home. So, they roam around, and sometimes they find home in places or people who may not be the best for them. On the other hand, explorers have foundation, have a home where they come back to when either they're exhausted from exploring, or maybe as a fallback place to figure out their next place or space of exploration. They will want to explore, or they will want to step out irrespective. The choice is, of course, yours. And this is where you choose whether you want your kid to be an explorer or a nomad. Another food for thought. Okay. Over to Manbahar now.
All right. So, we're going to be talking about how to show up and stay for a teenager, because previously, as it was beautifully covered by Rudrakshi, there were a lot of strategies discussed in how to establish a healthy relationship using boundaries and validation, etc. So when we think about bonding with our teens and establishing a relationship and actually showing up for them, we oftentimes imagine having long, deep talks or some grand gestures or some sort of a dramatic breakthrough moment. But honestly, it's the small, consistent things that matter the most. So there can be a few simple, practical ways that you can show up for your teenager. So I've given three basic examples here, like weekly walks, going out in the evening. It can be really healthy as well, uh, physically, and it can be quite calming for you mentally as well. It can help your team regulate themselves, because exercise is a great way to let go of irritable and aggressive feelings. Then, of course, chai dates. I'm pretty sure in every Indian household, chai seems to be a central part. And to bond over that can be a very easy way to establish some sort of a bonding ritual. Because for Indian families, chai time has always been more than tea, it is connection. So try making it like a weekly ritual, maybe Sunday evening chai or a short evening walk while after a tea. And even if they don't talk as much at first, the routine itself can become a safe space where they can open up when they are ready. It tells them that I'm here and I'll keep showing up. The key is to have one on one time without the screens. So, board games can also be a great alternative to that because it can introduce a lot of calmness, a lot of safety, and can even release a lot of apprehensions and ease out any kind of power dynamics that are inhibiting them from sharing their feelings with you, because we live in a world full of distractions like phones, laptops, work calls. But when teens notice that they don't get your full undivided attention, so even 20 minutes of one on one time where you keep your phone aside and genuinely listen and talk to them, it can build more trust than hours of distracted conversations. Because it's not about the quantity of time, but the quality of your presence. So, moving on, we need to establish one very important mantra over here, which is connection over control. Because it is very important to establish the bond that holds strength rather than how tight of a leash we have on them. Because holding a tight leash will oftentimes be met with defiance, but a connection that is strong and everlasting will always encourage open, safe, and healthy communication. Moving on, here are a few ways where we can establish connection over control. So the first rule is to have curiosity over control by asking questions like, what is really going on? Can we like sit and talk about what is happening? What are you feeling? Try to label this, try to use 2 3 words, whatever is coming to your mind, let it out. Because as mentioned by Rudrakshi, there are certain waves that a teen has of surge of emotions, and it is important that we sit with them through those intense waves of emotions, because that in a lot of instances it is strong emotions that are speaking over logic, they are speaking over what has really happened, and their mind can only process how you are reacting to their problems, their issues, or any sort of reaction or comfort that you are or are not giving. So that also leads to the second point, which means validation does not mean agreement. It is important to establish the fact that they are going to be making mistakes, because of course they are teenagers and you are the parents. So that does not mean that if you are validating their feelings, you are agreeing to what they have done. It is important to establish mistakes to be labeled as mistakes, but in a way where it is encouraged that these mistakes should be taken as a lesson, and the fact that they felt comfortable to come to you and talk about it, and that your guidance to them to not repeat these mistakes in the future or to take a better approach is oftentimes met with agreement rather than defiance. So teenagers listen more when they feel heard. It is often a parent's instinct to lecture them and tell them that, when this is the ideal way, one should get up at 6 a.m. every time and your life will be amazing. They know that. But why is it that it is so hard for them to actually apply it? Even though your points hold so much logic and they are so right and full of information, it is often because they do not feel as heard as they are feeling lectured. So, a great tip to start would be to avoid sarcasm, shaming, or lectures, and instead make them a part of the conversation, of the solution brainstorming process. Ask them what does work out for you. Do you want to start working on this habit by using this step, and then maybe make a schedule based on your convenience. Because even though the goal is the same, we need to respect the pace that they are following. Sometimes what happens is that during these conversations, a lot of frictions and slip ups can happen. So there are some band-aids and fixes that can be really helpful in such conflict situations. I'm sure we've all had these kind of friction and these kind of clashes with the team where maybe they are more focused on certain aspect of the conversation while we are trying to make them see logic. So there can be a few repair strategies that we can follow. So the first one would be out of the 3 hours of repair, which is to recognize the hurt. And then the second hour is remorse, which is to apologize with sincerity. Because a lot of times we've noticed that parents do not expect that they would be in a position where they have to apologize to the teen. But the thing is that when we do not model apologetic or remorseful behavior, we cannot expect that same sincerity from the teen as well, because it is not being modeled to them properly. And the third one is rebuild through consistent actions. Words sometimes are not enough to provide reassurance and safety when the damage is too severe. But it can always be rebuilt through consistent actions and ways in which you can establish your safety. And it is important to know that in these situations, you can regulate yourself as well by following certain strategies that can ground you in the moment and also help you calmly deal with the situation better. So, the first one would be to obviously pause before giving any sort of reactions. And that could include anything like taking a breath, counting, or taking a step away, or having a glass of cold water, anything that helps you ground in the moment so that both of you are not reacting only via emotions. And why it works is because, when parents stay regulated, teens are more likely to listen, they're more likely to reflect and regulate themselves as well. So, using neutral language, keeping your voice really steady, and maintaining an open body posture can be very useful. So, there's a dilemma that a lot of parents have been facing, which is the fragile balance of privacy and trust and safety. At what point do we stop becoming their friends and start becoming their parents? Or at what point do we value their privacy, but at the same time ensure that they are safe? Because we know how the world is out there. And as a parent, your best intention is obviously to ensure that the teenager is safe, but without making them feel suffocated and oftentimes like a CCTV camera on them. So, how do we balance these three things together? Let's establish that with a small little activity. So, there are these two statements, and the first one is my teen locks their door more than they talk to me. If you ever relate to this statement, you can drop a thumbs up by using Google Meet reactions. And if you do not relate to it, you can drop a thumbs down. Okay. I'm glad to see a lot of us do not relate to the fact that their teenager locks their door more than they talk to them. That's great. So the second one is they say it's none of my business when I ask them about their friends. Okay. So Esther relates to the second one. All right. So can we go to the next slide? So how did this make you feel? Did it make you feel abandoned, shut out from their world, rejected? If there are any other words that I haven't mentioned over here, you can feel free to drop what it make you feel in the chat box. Like when um, these kind of situations occurred to you when a teenager was practicing some sort of distance from you, like their friends came over and you went up to them and they were like, no, no, just go away, I'll talk to you later, right now I'm with my friends. Or like when they are on a call and you ask them that who are you talking to, and they give a reaction that, oh, why are you being so intrusive? Or any moment when you try to maybe get to know their world a little bit, but there always seems to be a glass wall around it. So, how does it make you feel when your teen establishes these kind of boundaries and they have slowly and steadily built their own world? You can either raise your hand and unmute yourself, or you can feel free to use the chat box. Okay. So Esther says that they feel unwanted. That is true. One can really feel out of touch that what happened, like, because the transition happens from childhood. So during childhood, you are the center of their world, and slowly and steadily, they start building their own world with their peers. So very rightfully mentioned by Esther, one can feel unwanted, they can feel abandoned, they can even feel confused as to what happened. Like at what point did suddenly I not be a part of their world? So to understand that, we need to establish that privacy is not secrecy; it is identity in progress. And to understand that, I've mentioned 2 points here, that they are not rejecting you, they're discovering who they are when no one is watching. So, oftentimes, when parents see that their teen has closed the doors on them or they are talking to friends, but they don't want to tell you exactly what they're talking about, they do not reject you. It is the fact that they are themselves not aware of what their place is in the world right now. And the second point is that the closed bedroom isn't a wall, it's a mirror, a space where they try on new versions of themselves. Teens oftentimes distance themselves from their parents because they need to understand the world from their own lens, and that lens is still under construction. So, when they are trying to build that, they need to take 2 steps away from their parents. They need to establish a whole new world for them, usually by their peers, usually by social media, usually by other people from outside the home, so that they can really build and work on what they aspire to see themselves as. So, we need to understand that even though this sounds really nice, we still need to understand and address the practical aspect of it, which is that even though even though we need to respect that their privacy is of utmost importance to them, their privacy cannot come at the cost of their safety. And as a parent, it is not possible to completely neglect the fact that you need to be wary of your child's safety. So it is important to establish that safety does not take a backseat. So sometimes when your instincts kick in, you will need to knock louder. But how do we balance this? This is where we talk about the golden balance. So, the golden balance, of course, starts with trust, but we keep the radar on. So, an example of that would be that, okay, fine, I will not go through your phone when you have left it unattended. But at the same time, if I notice any suspicious behaviors, I will ask questions and I will trust that you answer them honestly. The second one would be to negotiate boundaries instead of declaring them. As I mentioned before, making the teens a part of the process of rule making or boundary making can really help them feel safe and also a little bit in control of the situation. So, this last point is to be curious but not intrusive. How do we practice curiosity instead of intrusion? The main aspect of that will be built on trust. When we talk about being curious, we're talking about, okay, where are you going out? Like, let's say the teen is going out somewhere. So, asking them, where are you going out? Like, what time are you going to be back? Okay. Intrusion would be how many people are exactly going to be there, and what is that friend also going to be there, is that friend also not going to be there. I want to know all of their parents phone numbers. I want to know your everything, like whatever you're doing, whatever you're eating. So maybe not micromanaging them and not dictating every niche decision of theirs. To practice safety but from a distance is the ideal way to establish balance. Okay, so there can be certain strategies. So the first thing is to notice changes in behavior, mood, or friendships. And these sudden shifts oftentimes are a very obvious giveaway that something is clearly not normal. And a very common statement is, I understand you need space. I just want to know you're safe. So, can we agree on a check in time? This is a part where you're making them a part of the boundary making process. Because at this moment, you are establishing that, first of all, your priority and your intention is to ensure that they stay safe. But at the same time, you're also ensuring that you both mutually agree on their space where they're okay to share and be comfortable around you and ease you of that anxiety whether my teen is safe or not. And of course, to practice curiosity over intrusion, ask open ended questions. What was the best part of your day? That is going to be much better than what were you doing for 3 hours online. So, as I told you, the niche details can be a little intrusive and can also be a little jarring for teenagers. So, it's always important to ask questions that are more open ended, that talk more about them and how they felt during their day, instead of questions which sound more like an interrogation. We've oftentimes heard that life is the best teacher, mistakes are the best teacher, but sometimes we need to understand what is a safe area within which our teenager can afford to make mistakes. Because not all mistakes can always be a great teacher, sometimes they can be very altering to one's life and the path of their life. So, there's a small little concept of pen versus pencil mistakes or irreversible versus reversible mistakes. Pen can never be erased, so it is an irreversible mistake, and pencil is a reversible mistake. So, mistakes are healthy and the best teachers when made in pencils. This oftentimes means that if I were to give an example, I would say that let's say your teenager wanted to borrow your car because they wanted to like go with their friends somewhere, and you said no, absolutely not, it's not safe for you to drive like that, and you do not have your license yet and you're not old enough to drive yet, it's not a good decision. So they disobey and they sneak to your room, they take the keys and they take a car and they just go around the building and they go for one or two drives and then they park it back. But while parking, what happens is the car gets a little bit of a scratch near the tail light and they try to hide it, but then they eventually tell you that papa or mama, I accidentally did this, I'm so sorry. That is a pencil mistake, because at this point, the scratch is fixable. But the important part is that they're safe. And this is something that is going to teach them to never ever drive without license or without adult supervision until you enter the appropriate age. This is where their mistake was a good teacher to them, because now the experience has taught them not to do that. But for example, if they went on that drive and let's say they probably had an injury where they probably harmed someone else accidentally, or maybe they harmed themselves accidentally, something that can completely alter the course of their life permanently. That is not a mistake that is going to be a good teacher. That is going to be a mistake that is going to completely alter their life from that very point. And that is something that cannot be forgiven out of. That is something irreparable. And at that point, the mistake stops being a teacher and more like a bane that they have to carry. So it is important to understand the magnitude of the consequences that their mistakes will generate. So, to reserve your energy for establishing strictness on pen mistakes is always better than wasting it on pencil mistakes. If your teenager has dropped a glass bowl in the kitchen and it broke, that is always a pencil mistake. One can always ask for forgiveness and move out of it. But a mistake like cheating on an exam or stealing something or any sort of delinquent behavior, that can probably have a lot of disastrous consequences. And that is where, as a parent, we can step in and reprimand them. So, a nice quote that would sum up what I'm trying to say is that, um, sorry, can we go to the previous slide? I wasn't done with it. So, to stand away when they flap their wings and fall, but be near enough to catch them if they do. This can help you establish a lot of balance in how to counter the pen and pencil mistakes. So, here are some quick reflections where we can talk about how us as parents we can introspect about certain things that may be impacting our relationship with our teen. So, the first one is it a marriage problem or a parenting problem? Now, this can be dealt with in a way that, of course, the dynamics between two people who are raising a teenager together also need to have a communication just as open as they have it with their teen. Because believe it or not, it directly does impact them. And the second one is, where is this feeling of being everything to someone, either a partner or teen, coming from? This can be the fact that one oftentimes places certain pressures on themselves that I am supposed to be everything to my teen, their best friend, their confidant, their parent, their mentor, everything. Why does it have to be that way? So, this is a reflection that can really help you kind of decentralize yourself from the teen's life and not feel the pain of their boundaries. And then, is my intention to teach or is my intention to channelize my frustration onto my child? So, it is important to understand that what is the end goal of this certain act that you're choosing to do. So, if we want to snatch the phone of the teenager and say that, no, go back to your room and study. If the intention is to make them study, why are we choosing an action that is obviously going to encourage defiance? So it is important to internally reflect upon it by questioning the intent. Like, is my intent to teach them a lesson, or am I really feeling frustrated about something else? And this seems like a good way to let it out. Because we are humans, and sometimes we do hold the tendency of letting out our frustrations and sometimes our inner conflicts, and sometimes even our frustrations with other people on our teenager. So, to wrap it up with a quote, kids feel your intention more than they feel your intervention. And it is an important thing to establish here because teenagers are extremely perceptive to what is the intent behind your strategy. which is why they have a question, which is why they have a tendency of oftentimes questioning why. Like if you say, you know what, tomorrow wake up early and get ready. Okay, we have to go somewhere. A child would probably say, okay, where are we going? And you say that we're going to the mall. All right, that's it. But maybe a teenager might say, why are we going to the mall? Why are we going to mall on a Sunday? You know it's going to be crowded. Why do I have to get up early? Why can't we go to the mall at 2 p.m.? So a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity can be seen from them, and which is why it is important for you to be very clear with your intents. To and to understand this better, we're going to be having a little bit of a role play here with Rudrakshi and I.
Great. So let's connect whatever we've learned and spoken about so far into something that's more real and relatable. We have a dialogue between a parent and their teen, reflecting boundaries, validation, and empathy from the parent's end. And we've tried to make this as relatable as possible. So there are two characters: the parent, Priya, who is a mother in her late 40s, working professional, tries her best to be as supportive and open minded with her teen. Arav, the teen kid, 16-year-old, preparing for his 10th grade board exams. So the scene is that Priya is sitting in the living room. Arav walks in looking quite stressed with his shoulders slumped, and his mother is reading a book. Let's see how this conversation folds. Arav, you're home. How was your extra class today? You look a bit drained.
It was okay, I guess. So just kept on piling on more homework. And then Ananya was showing off her perfect score in the chemistry mock, and I just feel so far behind.
That it sounds like today was quite overwhelming for you with the extra workload and then feeling pressured by your friend Ananya's course. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone expects so much, and sometimes I just feel like I cannot keep up. Like, what if I don't get the marks for science? Papa will be like so disappointed.
Arav, I hear you. It's completely normal to feel that pressure, especially with board exams coming up. I do remember my times as well. This is a big year. And it's also natural to worry about how your papa or I might react. But I also want you to know that our love for you is not dependent on your scores. We will always be proud of the effort that you put in. Remember that.
Really? Because sometimes it feels like, I mean,
Mm-hmm. It might feel that way. I understand. In our country, in our culture, marks often feel like everything, don't they? You know, we're going to get a lot of calls from our relatives, and we may be answerable to a lot of them. But for us, what truly matters is your well being and that you're learning and growing. We want you to do your best, give your best for yourself, not just for a number or a grade. Okay? Manbahar, I think you're on mute.
sorry, I lost my network for a second. Can we go back to the previous dialogue?
Sure. It might feel that way. I understand. In our culture, in our country, marks often feel like everything, don't they? I know you must be worried. What if Bua calls in or other relatives call in and ask about your marks, and we would be the one answerable to them? But I want you to know that for us, what truly matters is your well being and that you're learning and growing. We want you to do your best for yourself. Give your 100%, not just for a number or grade. Okay?
Okay, but what if, like, my best like isn't enough for science? I I really don't like physics as much as I thought I would. Maths is fine and I love bio, but physics just feels like a struggle every single day.
Hmm. It sounds like you are having some real doubts about physics and it's making you feel more stressed about your choices. It's perfectly okay to feel that way and to reevaluate things. You've been trying hard with it, and I appreciate that. But pursuing something you genuinely dislike can be incredibly draining in the long run. You know how exhausting 11th and 12th studies can get, right?
Yeah, so you wouldn't be upset if I said I didn't want to pursue engineering or medicine?
Arav, my hope for you is that you find a path where you can be happy and fulfilled. Your papa and I have our hopes and dreams for you like any other parent. But those are our dreams. We want you to explore your interests and find out what truly excites you. We can guide you, share our experiences, give you our advice, but ultimately, this is your future and your decision about whatever career you want to pursue. We trust you to think about it seriously.
Okay. So if I wanted to explore something else, like well, let's say graphic design, for example, you would be open to discussing it?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be more than happy to. We want to understand what draws you to it, what is the scope, and we can further support you to explore it. I do remember having a long lost college friend of mine who's gone to that discipline. We can definitely get in touch with her. You could also research on your end, talk to people in that field, and then we can sit down and have a detailed discussion. So, my role is to help you find your strengths and build a good life for yourself, not to dictate it. Just remember.
Thanks, Ma. That actually helps a lot. I feel like a weight has been lifted.
I'm glad, beta. My door and my ears are always open. How about you get me some chai and biscuits, and maybe you can tell me more about what's on your mind if you feel like it.
Yes, 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 please. Chai sounds great, and I think I will.
Perfect. All right. This was a small representation of everything that Manbahar and I have been trying to say through different ways, through different ideas. Just something for you to keep in mind so that you can approach it with more calmness, honesty, and just empathy and curiosity at large. Right? Just to conclude this all, do remember you're not perfect. All parents lose their cool sometimes. You're a human being. What matters most is how you repair and your ongoing self work and how you continue to do that. Thank you so much for joining us for part one of this workshop. If you have any questions, anything else you would like to ask or share, feel free to. And we have a few resources and suggestions for you. If you would like to get the link to this particular podcast where this renowned psychologist talks about handling teenager anger shoots, let us know in the chat here. We can share the link on chat as well. Thank you so much for joining, everybody.